Bound by brutal debt, Alara Vance sang her soul away in a notorious jazz club, her voice the only payment for her dying sister's life. Humiliated by her cruel owner, she thought escape was impossible. Then Enzo Rossi, the city's ruthless mafia boss billionaire, emerged from the shadows, his gaze burning with an unsettling claim. He didn't offer freedom. He offered a gilded cage, dismantling her tormentors and rivals with brutal, possessive power. Now, amidst the inferno he ignited to save her, Alara must reconcile the monster who claimed her with the man she might be falling for. The air in the Velvet Shadow Club hung thick and syrupy, a cloying mix of stale cigar smoke, expensive whiskey, and the ghost of forgotten perfumes. It clung to Alara Vance's skin, seeped into her hair, and whispered promises of glamour that dissolved with every chord she played. Tonight, like every other night, her fingers danced across the cool ivory keys of the baby grand piano, coaxing mournful melodies from its depths. Her voice, a low, smoky alto, unwound itself into the opulent gloom, weaving tales of heartache and longing that were not just sung, but lived. Each note was a fragment of her soul, offered up to strangers who only saw the performance, never the prison. Her eyes, usually a vibrant, stormy gray, were dulled tonight, reflecting only the distant glint of a crystal chandelier. She wore a dress of dark, shimmering velvet, a cruel irony. It hugged her curves, hinting at a sensuality she no longer felt, and the fabric, though soft to the touch, felt like a heavy, suffocating weight. It was a uniform chosen not by her, but by Silas the Serpent Thorne, the club's proprietor. Thorne, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, reptilian eyes, enjoyed dressing his assets in costumes that accentuated their vulnerability. Alara's despair was a constant, dull ache beneath her ribs, a persistent hum that underscored every note she sang. It had begun 2 years ago, a relentless, insidious creep that started with a diagnosis for her younger sister, Lena, a rare, aggressive autoimmune disease. The medical bills, colossal and unyielding, had swallowed their meager savings whole, then spit them out, demanding more. Desperate, Alara had sought out every possible avenue, every lone shark, every shady corner of the city, until she found herself kneeling at Thorne's feet. He had offered a solution, a contract, cloaked in legalese and false promises. A golden cage, he'd called it, where her talent would flourish. It had become nothing more than a velvet cage, tighter with each passing month. She swallowed, the phantom taste of ash coating her tongue. Lena. Her sweet, fragile Lena, whose laughter used to fill their small apartment, now confined to a sterile hospital room, her small hand always reaching for Alara's. That image, the fragile hope in Lena's eyes, was the only thing that kept Alara from breaking, from screaming the truth into the microphone. She was not a performer, she was a prisoner, her voice a payment plan for her sister's dwindling life. The scent of Thorne's expensive cologne, a sharp, cloying musk, drifted past her. She didn't need to look up to know he was there, hovering, a dark shadow at the edge of the stage. He moved with a predatory grace, his presence the silent threat. She felt the micro-tension radiating from him, a low thrumming in the air that promised pain if she faltered, if she dared to forget her place. He enjoyed her fear, savored it like a connoisseur sips fine wine. It was a casual cruelty, woven into the fabric of their interactions, a reminder of her absolute helplessness. A little more melancholy tonight, Alara, Thorne's voice, soft as a viper's hiss, slithered into her ear during a brief pause between songs. His hand, heavy and surprisingly cold, rested for a fleeting moment on her shoulder, a possessive gesture that made her skin crawl. Our patrons appreciate the depth. Don't disappoint. Her stomach clenched. Don't disappoint. The unspoken threat hung in the air, a chilling breeze against her neck. She wanted to lash out, to scream at him, to smash her fingers against the keys in a discordant roar. But she couldn't. Lena. Always Lena. That name was the anchor that kept her from succumbing to the violent rebellion bubbling within her. It was also the chain that bound her to this suffocating existence. She turned her head slightly, offering him a polite, practiced smile that felt as brittle as glass. Never, Mr. Thorne. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the furious trembling in her hands, hidden just beneath the piano lid. She met his gaze for a second too long, a flicker of quiet defiance in her eyes, daring him to see past the facade. He simply smirked, a brief, unpleasant twist of his lips, before melting back into the shadows. He liked to remind her that she was invisible, that her talent, her beauty, her very existence here was merely a transaction. He loved to watch her sing, knowing that every exquisite note was extracted from her desperation. She was a bird with a broken wing, forced to sing its heart out for the amusement of those who held her captive. The club was a blur of faces, a sea of indifferent eyes and clinking glasses. None of them truly saw her. They saw the songbird of the velvet shadow, a voice of spectacle, a background to their own illicit deals and whispered secrets. She often wondered if anyone in this room, steeped in its dark allure, ever truly felt anything beyond their own selfish desires. Her art, once her most precious possession, had been commodified, stripped of its joy, becoming a bitter chore. Her spirit, once vibrant and hopeful, felt like a candle guttering in a strong wind, threatening to extinguish at any moment. As she transitioned into a bluesy, improvisational piece, her mind drifted, a dangerous habit. She remembered playing in sun-drenched parks, the open sky above her, the simple joy of sharing her music with passers-by. Now the sky was a ceiling of velvet, the air heavy with secrets, and the only sun she saw was the cruel glare of the stage lights. Each day was a relentless march towards more debt, more control, more faded dreams. The weight of it was suffocating. She felt a phantom hand closing around her throat, squeezing the life, the passion, out of her. Her fingers stumbled on a difficult chord, a tiny, almost imperceptible falter. A flash of fear, sharp and cold, shot through her. Or he would notice. He always noticed. She quickly recovered, pouring every ounce of her remaining strength into the next verse, her voice rising, then falling, like a heartbroken sigh. The song ended, leaving an echo of lingering sadness in the room. A smattering of polite applause, the clinking of ice, the murmur of conversation, the usual response. She kept her head bowed, resisting the urge to collapse. Her shift was far from over. Hours stretched before her, each one an eternity of forced smiles and hollow melodies. As she took a sip of the lukewarm water provided, a strange chill permeated the heavy atmosphere of the club. It wasn't just the air conditioning. It was a shift in the room's energy, a sudden, almost imperceptible tension that made the hairs on her arms prickle. The low hum of conversation seemed to dip, replaced by a more watchful silence. Alara subtly lifted her gaze, scanning the room. Her eyes landed on a figure just entering from the private entrance near the back. A man. He wore a suit as dark and immaculate as the shadows he seemed to emerge from, the fabric so fine it whispered of immense wealth and dangerous tailoring. He moved with an effortless grace that contradicted the sheer power radiating from him, a silent force that made even the most boisterous patrons instinctively quieten. His presence was not just felt. It was consumed by the very air, pulling focus, demanding attention without a single shouted command. A tremor, not entirely of fear, but of a primal recognition of sheer, unadulterated dominance, ran through Alara. She had never seen him before, yet she knew, with an unsettling certainty, that this man was unlike any other she had encountered in Thorne's treacherous club. He was the kind of dangerous that didn't need a weapon to intimidate, the kind of power that redefined the very atmosphere of a room. And as he slowly, deliberately scanned the club, his eyes, dark and piercing, eventually found hers, holding them captive in a gaze that promised both peril and an unknown destiny. The velvet shadow, already a cage, suddenly felt both smaller and infinitely more precarious. He moved through the glittering gloom of the velvet shadow like a shadow given form, impossibly solid yet fluid, drawing every eye without seeking a single glance. Enzo the Phantom Rossi. The name was a whispered legend, a testament to his elusive yet absolute power. Tonight, he was anything but a phantom. He was a stark, undeniable presence. His suit, a masterpiece of charcoal wool, seemed to absorb the ambient light, making him appear even more imposing. The subtle scent of expensive leather and something faintly metallic, like clean steel, preceded him. He wasn't merely entering a room, he was laying claim to it, to every molecule of air, every hushed conversation. Alara felt the weight of his gaze from across the club, a physical pressure that tightened her chest. It was a stark contrast to the indifferent stares she usually endured. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, were fixed on her, analyzing, dissecting. It wasn't the hungry, leering gaze of Thorne's usual clientele. It was something far more intense, far more dangerous. It was the look of a predator who had found something unexpected, something rare. Her fingers, usually so confident on the keys, trembled for a fleeting second. This man, this mythical figure, made the seasoned patrons, men who trafficked in fear and illicit goods, shift uneasily in their expensive chairs. She wondered, with a strange mix of dread and morbid curiosity, why he was here tonight in her velvet cage. His world, she knew, was one of high stakes and deeper shadows than even Thorn dared to tread. She forced herself to meet his gaze, just for a breath. The contact was electric, a jolt that snaked down her spine. There was no malice in his eyes, no overt threat, but an unsettling intensity, a depth that hinted at untold secrets and unwavering resolve. He was dissecting her, she realized, not just her performance, but her. Who was Alara Vance, the desperate singer? What lay beneath the carefully constructed mask of melancholic beauty? Breaking eye contact, she plunged back into her music, pouring all her fear and fascination into a frantic improvisation. The piano wept, then soared, then ached with a raw, visceral emotion she rarely dared to unleash. She imagined him listening, truly listening, not just to the notes, but to the desperate plea embedded within them. She allowed herself for a moment to hope that someone, anyone, might finally hear her. Enzo, meanwhile, watched her, utterly consumed. The world outside her music faded. Her voice, a mournful whisper that swelled into a desperate cry, resonated deep within him. It was a melody of beautiful brokenness, a truth he recognized instantly. He saw the subtle tremor in her hands, the almost imperceptible flinch when Thorn's shadow fell near her. He saw the weariness etched around her stormy eyes, eyes that held more defiance than sorrow. She wasn't just singing, she was fighting, waging a silent war with every note. He felt a simmering, unfamiliar anger stir within him, anger at the unseen chains, at the predator who dared to dull such a brilliant flame. This woman was a masterpiece of hidden strength, a vibrant splash of color in this desolate, gilded cage. He wanted to understand the depth of her despair, to peel back the layers of her forced composure. As her set drew to a close, a subtle shift in the club's energy pulled his attention away from Alara for a moment. He caught a fleeting glimpse of Thorn, leaning conspiratorially close to a burly man with a scar running across his eyebrow. Their voices were low, guttural. The package, Thorn hissed, his words barely audible above the fading applause, but to Enzo's finely tuned senses, they cut through the air like a blade. She's ready by midnight. Make sure there are no loose ends. No fuss. The client is particular. Understood, the man grunted, a brutish edge to his voice. The ferry to Staten Island. Discreet. A package. A young girl. Enzo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Thorn trafficked in more than just music and gambling. Enzo had suspected as much, but to hear it so blatantly confirmed, especially tonight, left a bitter taste. He filed the information away, a new thread in the intricate web of this club's dark dealings. Alara, unaware that her precarious world was about to collide with a far greater darkness, moved to the edge of the stage, offering a polite, practiced bow. Just as she turned to leave, seeking the momentary solace of the backstage area, Thorn's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was rough, bruising. Not so fast, Alara, he sneered, his voice loud enough for several nearby tables to hear, though they pretended not to. Your performance tonight was adequate. Barely. Remind yourself who pays for your sister's fancy pills. A little gratitude, perhaps. He squeezed her wrist tighter, his eyes boring into hers with malicious pleasure. A gasp caught in Alara's throat. Her face, already pale from exhaustion, flushed a mortified crimson. The raw humiliation burned through her, a searing inferno in her cheeks. She felt every indifferent eye, every whispered comment, every flicker of pity or amusement. This was Thorn's favorite game, public degradation. It was designed to break her, to remind her that she owned nothing, not even her own dignity. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a tightening fist. She tried to pull away, but his grip was unyielding, laced with the icy promise of pain. Enzo watched the scene unfold, a glacial calm settling over his features. But beneath that placid exterior, a storm was brewing. The casual cruelty, the public display of dominance over a woman so clearly vulnerable, infuriated him. Thorn was a fool, mistaking a beautiful, rare gem for a mere trinket. And he was touching his gem. The possessiveness that had stirred within him moments ago solidified into a steel-hard resolve. This serpent would learn. Without a word, without a change in his expression, Enzo signaled a passing server. The Macallan 72, he stated, his voice a low rumble that cut through the lingering chatter. And a glass for the lady on stage. His eyes, however, never left Alara and Thorn. The server, a veteran of the Velvet Shadow's unspoken rules, merely nodded, eyes wide with understanding. He returned swiftly with a bottle, a single vintage, impossibly rare, priced to deter even the most extravagant. Enzo placed a thick wad of crisp, new $100 bills on the table, far more than the bottle's already astronomical cost. He didn't wait for change. It was a silent, unblinking challenge, a display of wealth so flagrant it verged on aggressive. It wasn't about the drink. It was about asserting his presence, his undeniable authority, directly into Thorne's carefully guarded territory. Thorne's head snapped up, his grip on Alara's wrist loosening fractionally as his eyes darted to Enzo's table. He recognized the man, of course. Everyone in this city did. A flicker of alarm, quickly masked, crossed his face. He released Alara's wrist, the sudden freedom feeling strangely unsettling. Alara rubbed her sore wrist, her gaze drawn to Enzo's table. The Macallan 72. A legendary, unobtainable spirit. And the sheer nonchalant sum of money he placed on the table, a casual dismissal of value that spoke volumes. Was it a challenge? A mockery? Or was it for her? The idea was absurd, terrifying, yet a tiny, desperate tendril of hope, fragile as gossamer, began to unfurl in her chest. Enzo merely lifted the glass of Macallan to his lips, his gaze still fixed on Alara, a silent promise in his eyes. He raised an eyebrow, a subtle, imperious gesture, daring Thorne to object, daring him to continue his little game of humiliation. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the entire club holding its breath. Thorne, for the first time that night, seemed to shrink. He had stepped on a viper, and the viper had just shown its fangs. Alara felt the weight of Enzo's attention, heavy and palpable, yet strangely exhilarating. It was terrifying to be seen by such a man, to be the focus of such dangerous power. But after so long feeling invisible, there was a raw, primal thrill in it too. A storm was indeed gathering, and she, the desperate songbird, suddenly found herself at its very eye, caught between two formidable predators. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. The game, whatever it was, had just begun. And she, Alara Vance, was no longer just a pawn in Thorne's hands. She was now, inexplicably, irrevocably, entangled with Enzo, the Phantom Rossi. Her future, once a dim, predictable path, had just fractured into 1,000 dangerous possibilities. The brutal grip on Alara's wrist had vanished, leaving a faint, burning ache that mirrored the humiliation scorching her cheeks. Thorne, pale with a venomous fury barely contained, dragged her backstage the moment her set concluded. The air in the cramped, grimy corridor, usually thick with the scent of cheap disinfectant and sweat, now felt charged with an electricity of pure malevolence. Alara could taste it, acrid on her tongue. Her heart thundered against her ribs, a desperate drumbeat against the rising tide of dread. "You insolent little whore," Thorne hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl, barely a whisper, yet sharper than any shout. His eyes, usually cold, now burned with a chilling, reptilian rage. "You think a gesture from a man like Rossi absolves you of your obligations? You think I am so easily intimidated?" He slammed a fist against the cinderblock wall beside her head, a sudden jarring impact making her flinch violently. The rough concrete scraped against her velvet sleeve, a dull, abrasive sound. Alara pressed herself against the cold, damp wall, the clammy surface doing little to soothe the sudden cold sweat prickling her skin. "I did nothing, Mr. Thorne," she managed, her voice a thin, reedy whisper she barely recognized as her own. "I simply performed." "Lies," he spat, spittle flecking her face. "That performance was a defiance. And that man's gaze? It lingered on you like a promise." "Promise," he made. "Not me. Not you. And that, my little songbird, is a very dangerous game for you to be playing." His proximity was suffocating. She could smell the expensive, cloying musk of his cologne, now mixed with the bitter tang of his rage. It filled her nostrils, made her gorge rise. He held up a stack of papers, crisply bound. "Your sister's medical bills. Funny how they keep accumulating, isn't it? Such a fragile little thing. And your contract. Clause 7b. Failure to uphold the integrity of the establishment or to adequately represent the owner's interests may result in termination of medical benefits and immediate full repayment of all outstanding debts. Do you understand, Alara?" He tapped the papers menacingly against her temple. "Every single penny. And if you can't pay, then perhaps your sister's care takes a less favorable turn." The words were icicles, piercing her heart. Lena. Always Lena. The fragile thread that bound her to this monster. The one vulnerability Thorn exploited without mercy. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her. Her quiet defiance, moments ago a burning ember, was now extinguished under Thorn's casual cruelty. She felt utterly helpless, her world shrinking to the confines of this grimy corridor and the menacing figure before her. No, Alara whispered, the single word a raw, desperate plea. Please, Mr. Thorn, don't touch Lena. Then you will perform every night twice as long for half the pay. And you will smile. A genuine smile, Alara, or I will ensure your sister feels the consequences of your insolence. He leaned in, his breath hot and foul against her ear. And if that phantom tries to interfere again, I will make sure he understands that some property is not for sale, no matter the price. You are my property, Alara. Don't forget it. He released her, turning his back with a dismissive wave, leaving her trembling, utterly alone, in the suffocating silence. For the next few days, Alara walked through a waking nightmare. Thorn made good on his threats. Her shifts stretched into the early hours of the morning, her body aching, her voice raw. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. During the day, she made desperate, futile attempts to break free. She called every lawyer listed in her worn phone book, using a burner phone she'd secretly acquired. The results were always the same. Alara Vance, represented by Silas Thorn. I'm afraid I have a scheduling conflict. Or more bluntly, we don't get involved in Mr. Thorn's affairs. Each rejection was a fresh stab of hopelessness, confirming her absolute entrapment. The cold click of the receiver after another polite refusal echoed the sound of a prison door slamming shut. She even tried to speak to Lena's doctors to understand the true cost of her sister's care, to see if there was any way to reduce the exorbitant bills Thorn presented. But they were evasive, their answers vague, their eyes shifting uncomfortably. It was clear Thorn's influence reached far beyond the velvet walls of his club. The sterile, antiseptic scent of the hospital, usually a source of anxiety, now felt like a final, suffocating proof of her despair. Lena, frail and small in her hospital bed, offered a weak smile. You look tired, Alara. That simple observation was a crushing blow, fueling her guilt. Yet, amidst the deepening despair, strange things began to happen. A rare, first-edition sheet music for her favorite, almost impossible to find, jazz composition appeared on her piano stand, left anonymously. The pages, crisp and bearing the faint, sweet scent of old paper and new ink, felt impossibly precious. Then Lena's hospital room got an upgrade, a quieter, more advanced monitoring system, fresher flowers, lilies, her favorite, always lilies, and a subtle but noticeable improvement in the nursing staff's attentiveness. When Alara questioned the hospital administration, they stammered about anonymous benefactors and charitable donations. And then there were the shadows. Tall, silent men, always impeccably dressed, who appeared on her walk to the hospital, on her brief trips to the grocery store. They never approached her, never spoke, but their presence was a palpable, unnerving shield. They were always just out of reach, yet always there. Like Marco, the man she'd seen with Enzo, whose watchful gaze seemed to follow her every move from a distance, never intrusive, always observant. It was unsettling, this pervasive awareness, this sense of being constantly watched, but also strangely comforting. It was a golden thread, invisible but undeniably present, weaving itself into the dark tapestry of her life. She felt like a specimen under a powerful microscope, and Enzo Rossi, the Phantom, was the scientist. Was he a guardian, or merely a new, more powerful captor? The suspicion gnawed at her, constant internal conflict. The turning point came on a Tuesday, during her late-night set. Thorn, enraged by the subtle, persistent erosion of his control and Enzo's unspoken interference, had orchestrated a more sinister reminder. Alara was in the middle of a complex piano solo, her fingers flying over the keys, lost in the music, when the stage plunged into sudden, jarring darkness. A loud crack echoed through the club as a heavy spotlight, seemingly dislodged, swung violently from its rigging, hurtling downwards towards the very spot where she sat. Pure, unadulterated terror seized her. Time seemed to slow. She saw the metallic glint, the jagged edges, the horrifying trajectory. Her breath hitched, a silent scream trapped in her throat. She braced for impact, the cold, certain dread of her demise washing over her. This was it. This was how her story ended. Lena. But then an impossible blur. A sudden jarring shove from behind, strong and swift, propelling her off the piano stool and onto the dusty floor just as the spotlight crashed down, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards precisely where her head had been moments before. The ear-splitting clang of metal, the splintering of wood from the piano bench, the frantic gasps from the audience, it all blended into a deafening cacophony. A searing pain shot up her arm where she'd landed awkwardly. Before she could process the shock, strong hands, firm and unyielding, were pulling her to her feet, guiding her away from the immediate danger. She looked up, her eyes wide, still clouded with residual terror. It was Marco, Enzo's silent, watchful enforcer. His face was a mask of grim efficiency, his eyes scanning the chaos with predatory focus. He nodded once, a brief, sharp gesture, then melted back into the shadows of the crowd. Alara stumbled, her legs weak beneath her. She felt sick, the metallic tang of fear thick in her mouth. This wasn't an accident. It couldn't be. Someone had tried to kill her. And someone, just as silently, had saved her. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was hopelessly vulnerable, a pawn in a game far deadlier than she could ever comprehend. She needed help. Real help. And there was only one man who could offer it. The very next morning, a discreet note, delivered by Marco, appeared under her apartment door. It simply read, 8 o'clock. My office. Come along. Rossi. There was no question mark, no plea, just an imperative. She went. Enzo Rossi's office was not in the Velvet Shadow. It was in a discreet, nondescript building downtown, the kind that blended into the city's skyline, its true purpose hidden beneath layers of innocuous concrete and smoked glass. Marco greeted her, his gaze unwavering, then ushered her into a lavish yet understated room. The air was cool, clean, carrying the faint, rich scent of leather and expensive coffee. Enzo sat behind a massive dark wood desk, his silhouette framed against the panoramic view of the city, a concrete jungle stretching endlessly under a bruised morning sky. He was not wearing a suit, but simple dark cashmere sweater that somehow made him appear even more formidable, revealing the broad, powerful expanse of his shoulders. He didn't smile. He rarely did. His winter storm eyes met hers, unwavering, assessing. Alara Vance, he began, his voice the low, resonant rumble that seemed to fill the spacious room. You almost died last night. She shivered, the memory fresh, terrifying. I know. Thorn is a fool. A viper who mistakes talent for ownership. He will never let you go. Not unless he is forced. Enzo leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. The subtle gleam of a heavy, dark watch caught the light. I know about your sister, Lena. Her condition. You're dead. Everything. Alara's breath hitched. Shame and desperation twisted in her gut. How? My business is information, Miss Vance. And protection. He paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air. Thorn thinks you are his asset. My rivals, they see you as a weakness they can exploit to get to me. You are currently in the middle of a war you never asked for, caught between men who will not hesitate to destroy you. His honesty, brutal and unvarnished, was a jarring contrast to Thorn's insidious lies. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, fear and a strange, desperate hope warring within her. Another contract? A new cage? Enzo's eyes narrowed, a glint of something powerful and possessive in their depths. I want you free from Thorn. I want your sister safe. I want you to sing, truly sing, without fear. And in return, he pushed a stack of neatly bound legal documents across the polished desk towards her. You will work for me. You will be my personal artist. Your debt to Thorn will be eradicated. Lena's medical expenses taken care of. You will live under my protection. You will be safe. But you will also be mine. His gaze was absolute, brooking no argument. It is not a request, Alara. It is an offer. And it is the only one you will get. She stared at the papers, then back at him. Mine. The word echoed in the cavernous room, a possessive declaration that felt both terrifying and undeniably alluring. It was a devil's bargain, trading one cage for another, albeit a far more gilded and potentially safer one. But what choice did she have? The alternative was certain destruction for both her and Lena. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the cool, smooth paper. The city skyline outside the window seemed to mock her, reminding her of the vast, dangerous world she was about to step into. So she said, her voice thin but steady, her eyes meeting his. "What's the catch, Mr. Rossi? What does a man like you truly expect in return for such generosity?" The ascent was silent, almost reverent. Alara stood beside Marco in the private elevator, the polished steel walls reflecting her disheveled image like a distorted mirror. Her hands, still faintly trembling from the adrenaline of Enzo's ultimatum, clutched the strap of her worn satchel, a paltry collection of necessities that felt pitifully inadequate for the world she was about to enter. The ascent was unervingly swift, lifting them away from the city's roar, towards an unknown, dangerous summit. Marco, a statue of quiet vigilance, offered no conversation, only a grim, unwavering gaze that scanned the numbers above the door. Each rising floor felt like a severing, a silent farewell to the remnants of her old, desperate life. The doors parted with a soft, pneumatic hiss, revealing a vista that stole Alara's breath. Not merely an apartment, but an airy. Enzo Rossi's penthouse sprawled beneath the impossible expanse of the Manhattan sky, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a dizzying, untamed panorama of glittering lights and shadowed skyscrapers. The air, crisp and scentless, was a stark contrast to the cloying fumes of the velvet shadow. It smelled of quiet power, of impeccable cleanliness, and faintly, of polished wood and something subtly masculine. Her gaze swept across the vast open-plan space, gleaming dark oak floors, walls the color of moonlight, minimalist furniture that spoke of exquisite taste and untold wealth. A grand piano, an ebony jewel, sat in a secluded alcove, bathed in the city's ethereal glow. It wasn't just luxurious. It was a fortress, an untouchable sanctuary suspended above the chaos. Yet a shiver traced down her spine. The silence was almost oppressive, the kind that whispered secrets instead of shouting them. "Your room," Marco's voice, a low rumble, broke the spell. He gestured towards a discreet, panel door off the main living area. "Mr. Rossi thought you might prefer privacy." Privacy. The word felt alien, a concept she hadn't truly known in years. She nodded, unable to articulate the complex tangle of emotions, relief, fear, gratitude, and a bewildering sense of being utterly out of her depth. She stepped inside. The room was a haven of muted elegance, a vast, impossibly soft bed dressed in crisp white linens, a chaise lounge facing another expansive window, and a sleek modern bathroom. A walk-in closet, absurdly large, already held a small collection of high-quality basics, clothes chosen with an unnerving precision that matched her size and style, though she'd never mentioned either. The unexpected thoughtfulness was a dizzying contradiction to the blunt, possessive nature of Enzo's offer. She ran a hand over the cool, smooth fabric of a silk blouse hanging in the closet. Who had done this? Who had predicted her needs, her dimensions, with such silent efficiency? It was unsettling, a constant reminder of the unseen network that now enveloped her. She was safe, yes, but at what cost to her autonomy? The thought gnawed at her, a bitter counterpoint to the rush of relief. Was this freedom, or merely a more comfortable, more sophisticated cage? The first few days were a blur of disorientation and hyper-awareness. Enzo moved through his penthouse with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a seasoned predator. His mornings began before dawn, the faint clinking of ceramic from the kitchen hinting at his disciplined routine. Alara would wake to the rich, earthy aroma of freshly brewed espresso, and sometimes the low murmur of his voice on the phone, sharp and decisive, discussing unseen dealings that made her skin prickle. He ate breakfast alone, usually a simple, almost austere meal, consumed with a focused intensity that bordered on ritual. Alara, accustomed to the chaotic hum of her old apartment, found the silence of the penthouse both liberating and terrifying. It amplified every thought, every lingering fear. She ate her meals, delivered by Marco or prepared by a silent, efficient housekeeper in her room, initially too intimidated to join Enzo in the grand dining area. He didn't press, a subtle courtesy that further blurred the lines between captor and protector. Yet his presence was pervasive. Even when unseen, she felt him, a constant low thrum beneath the veneer of luxury. She would catch glimpses of him through the open doors. Enzo at his desk, bathed in the cool light of multiple monitors, his dark hair falling over his brow as he pored over documents. Enzo in the sleek, minimalist gym, his powerful frame moving with a dangerous grace that spoke of coiled strength. Each sighting was a subtle jolt, a reminder of the raw, untamed power she had tethered herself to. One evening, Marco appeared at her door, holding a steaming plate. Mr. Rossi insisted, he said, his voice unusually soft. He noted you haven't been eating properly. On the plate was a perfectly grilled salmon, fragrant with lemon and herbs, accompanied by vibrant green asparagus. The aroma alone made her stomach ache with hunger. It was a gourmet meal, prepared with exquisite care, a far cry from the hurried takeout she usually subsisted on. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, the unexpected kindness bringing a prickle of tears to her eyes. It was a small, almost insignificant gesture, yet it resonated deeply, a powerful testament to the unexpected layers of the man who now held her fate. Enzo's acts of care were never announced, never overtly solicitous. They were subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in her environment. The temperature in her room was always perfect. The small private studio attached to her suite, equipped with a top-of-the-line digital piano and soundproofing, was ready for her when she finally dared to explore it. He never intruded, never demanded. He simply provided. It was a quiet claim, a powerful declaration of his presence and his possessive intent, without needing to utter a single word. One afternoon, driven by an irresistible urge to reclaim a piece of herself, Alara found herself at the grand piano in the living area. Her fingers, tentative at first, then gaining confidence, coaxed a haunting jazz piece from the keys. She lost herself in the music, the familiar solace washing over her. When she finished, the last note lingering in the air, she became aware of a presence. Enzo stood in the doorway of his office, unmoving, watching her. He had been there for a while, she realized, a silent, unblinking observer. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, dark and intense, held a deep, almost primal appreciation. "Beautiful," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper that sent a tremor through her. "That piece. What was it?" "An improvisation," she replied, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet a strange thrill sparked within her. "I call it Echoes of Midnight." He nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on her. "It fits. It speaks of longing and defiance." He moved, then, walking slowly towards the piano, his presence growing more formidable with each step. He stopped just beside her, his proximity overwhelming. She could feel the subtle heat radiating from his body, the faint scent of his cologne, a clean, sophisticated aroma that was nothing like Thorne's cloying musk. "You play as if your life depends on it," he observed, his eyes piercing hers. "Does it?" Alara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "In a way. It's the only part of me that's truly mine." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a fleeting glimpse of something dangerous and alluring. "Not anymore. Now it's also mine to protect." His hand, strong and warm, reached out, hovering for a moment above hers on the keys, a silent, possessive gesture that made her pulse quicken. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken desires and the subtle dance of power. She was acutely aware of his masculine strength, the disciplined control he held over himself, even as his gaze burned into hers. Is he a savior or a new captor? The question screamed in her mind, a constant internal conflict. She was drawn to his formidable strength, the unwavering security he offered, a stark contrast to the terror and helplessness she had endured. Yet the price of that safety felt immense. Her independence, her very self, felt subsumed by his all-encompassing presence. This was a dangerous game, one where the lines between gratitude and surrender, between freedom and ownership, blur into a captivating, terrifying haze. Her fascination with the forbidden, with this dangerous man, grew with every shared glance, every charged silence. She knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that her world, now irrevocably entwined with his, was about to become infinitely more perilous. The sudden, insistent buzz of Enzo's phone, vibrating against the polished wood of the piano, shattered the delicate moment. His gaze reluctantly left hers, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as he glanced at the caller ID. "Marco," he murmured, his voice now devoid of any lingering warmth, replaced by a sharp, businesslike edge. He moved away from the piano, breaking the electric current between them, and answered the call, his back to her, his voice dropping to a low, guarded tone. Alara watched his broad shoulders, the way he seemed to instantly erect an invisible barrier. She knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that the quiet interlude in this luxurious cage was about to be violently interrupted. His world, the one he had drawn her into, was about to demand its dues. And she, for all her newfound comfort, was still utterly unprepared for its true darkness. The invitation had appeared on a silver tray, Beside her morning coffee, an elegant cream-colored card embossed with gold leaf. It was for a private high-stakes art auction benefiting a children's hospital, a world so far removed from her own that it felt like fiction. "You will accompany me," Enzo had stated, not asked, later that day. He provided a dress, a sheath of deep sapphire silk that clung to her form like a second skin, cool and impossibly soft. It was another one of his silent claims, dressing her in his wealth, presenting her to his world. Now standing in the hushed, opulent gallery, a flute of champagne cold and foreign in her hand, Alara felt like an imposter. The air hummed with a low murmur of old money and new power, the scent of expensive perfume mingling with the faint, dusty aroma of priceless art. Men in immaculate tuxedos and women dripping with jewels floated through the room, their laughter tinkling like distant bells. Enzo stood beside her, a formidable, grounding presence in this sea of polite predators. His hand rested on the small of her back, a gesture that was both possessive and profoundly protective. It was a brand, a silent declaration to all who looked their way. She is with me. She is untouchable. Alara felt the weight of curious, assessing gazes. Whispers followed them like a rustling wake. "Is that Rossi? And who is the woman?" The scrutiny made her skin prickle. She clutched her champagne flute tighter, the delicate crystal threatening to shatter under the pressure. This was his world, a battlefield of whispered threats and calculated alliances, all masked by a veneer of sophisticated charm. She was a weapon, she realized, or perhaps a shield. Her presence was a message, and she didn't yet know what it said. "Relax." Enzo's voice was a low, intimate rumble near her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. "They are merely wolves deciding if they are brave enough to hunt a lion." His fingers flexed slightly against her back, a subtle, reassuring pressure. Just as a sliver of comfort began to settle in her chest, a man stepped into their path, seemingly by accident. He was handsome in a slick, predatory way, his tuxedo tailored to perfection, a diamond pin glittering on his lapel. But his smile was thin, and his eyes, the color of muddy water, held a cold, calculating light. Alara felt Enzo's body go preternaturally still, the muscles in his back tightening like coiled steel beneath his jacket. "Rossi," the man said, his voice smooth as oiled silk, though it held a grating, unpleasant edge. "Fancy seeing you slumming it with the philanthropists." "Matteo," Enzo replied, his tone utterly devoid of warmth, flat and dangerous as a frozen lake. "I didn't realize they allowed snakes in here." The man, Matteo Carbone, chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. His muddy eyes slid over to Alara, lingering on her with an insolent, proprietary appraisal that made her feel stripped bare. "And who is this lovely new acquisition?" he purred, the word landing like a deliberate insult. "I've heard whispers of a new songbird in the city. One with a particularly beautiful voice." He took a step closer, his gaze dropping to her throat. "It would be a devastating shame," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "if something were to happen to such a delicate instrument." The threat, veiled but unmistakable, hung in the air between them, a poisonous, suffocating fog. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Alara. This wasn't a casual slight. It was a direct, targeted message. He was telling Enzo, in the most public and insulting way possible, that she was vulnerable, that she was a target. Enzo did not move. He did not raise his voice, but the temperature around them seemed to plummet. A terrifying, absolute stillness descended upon him. His hand on her back, once a comforting weight, now felt like an iron clamp, pulling her flush against his side, shielding her with his body. He looked at Matteo, and for the first time, Alara saw the true, unvarnished predator beneath the veneer of control. It was an expression of such chilling, lethal promise that it made her own blood run cold. "You have made a grave error, Matteo," Enzo said, his voice quiet, almost conversational, yet it carried the finality of a death sentence. "One you will regret for a very long time." Without another word, Enzo turned, his hand guiding Alara firmly away from the confrontation. He moved with a calm, unhurried grace, as if they were merely leaving a tedious conversation. But Alara could feel the barely restrained violence thrumming through him, a devastating, controlled inferno. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, terrified rhythm. The awe she felt at his absolute control was matched only by the sheer terror of what that control was holding back. Marco materialized at the gallery's exit, his face a grim, unreadable mask. He held the door of the armored sedan open. Inside, The silence was deafening, thick with unspoken fury. Alara sat stiffly on the plush leather seat, the scent of which now seemed overwhelmingly masculine and dangerous. She stared at Enzo's profile, his jaw set like granite, his eyes fixed on the blur of city lights outside the tinted window. What happens now? She whispered, the words catching in her throat. Enzo turned his head slowly, his storm-colored eyes meeting hers. The cold fury was still there, but beneath it, she saw a flicker of something else, a fierce, protective fire that burned just for her. He will learn, Enzo said simply, that what is mine is not to be touched, or threatened, or even spoken of. As if on cue, a phone, a sleek, encrypted device, buzzed on the center console. Enzo tapped the speakerphone icon. Marco's voice, crisp and devoid of emotion, filled the car. Boss, the package Carbone was expecting at the docks tonight, the one from Antwerp, it seems to have been misplaced. The Port Authority has impounded the entire container due to an anonymous tip regarding irregularities. There was a brief pause. Initial estimates put his losses north of 10 million. Alara's breath hitched. 10 million. Gone. Just like that. In the span of minutes, with a single, anonymous tip. It wasn't a fistfight in an alley. It was a surgical strike, a devastating blow delivered with chilling, invisible efficiency. This was Enzo's power. Not just brute force, but a vast, intricate network that could cripple his enemies without ever laying a hand on them. The relief that flooded her was so profound it made her feel weak. She was safe. Utterly, completely safe. But that relief was immediately followed by a chilling, awe-inspiring fear. The man beside her, the man who had bought her freedom, could dismantle another man's empire with a quiet command. She had sought a protector and found a king, one who ruled his dark kingdom with an iron, unforgiving will. Enzo disconnected the call, plunging the car back into silence. He reached across the space between them, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. His touch was warm, a stark contrast to the cold reality of his actions. He will never speak to you again, Enzo promised, his voice a low, possessive vow that resonated deep in her soul. No one will. And in that moment, Alara finally understood. She was safe with him precisely because she was terrified of him. His protection was absolute, a fortress built of fear and power, and she was now standing at its very heart. The nights in the penthouse had settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. The immediate threat of Matteo Carbone had receded, replaced by a tense, watchful peace. Yet, Alara felt the invisible reverberations of Enzo's swift, brutal retaliation in every corner of their shared silence. He had moved worlds to protect her, and the weight of that action, the sheer scale of his power, was a constant, humming presence in the air between them. A debt of gratitude warred with a primal fear, creating a confusing, magnetic pull that drew her closer to him even as she trembled at what he was. One evening, the city outside was a tapestry of glittering diamonds against black velvet. Enzo sat in a low armchair, a glass of amber whiskey swirling in his hand, the ice clinking softly like a distant, lonely bell. He was staring out at the skyline, but Alara knew he wasn't seeing the buildings. His mind was somewhere else, a darker, more complicated landscape. The raw violence she had witnessed him command at the gallery seemed to cling to him, a phantom shroud of power and regret. She felt an overwhelming urge to break through that silence, to offer something other than fear or gratitude. She wanted to offer him a piece of her own language, the one thing she truly owned. Enzo, she said, her voice soft in the vast, quiet room. He turned his head, his stormy eyes finding hers in the dim light. I'd like to play for you, if you'll let me. Not as a performance, just for you. He watched her for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the permission she needed. She moved to the grand piano, its polished ebony surface reflecting the city lights like a dark, still lake. She didn't choose a familiar standard. Instead, she let her fingers find the keys and began to play something new, a melody that had been forming in the quiet corners of her mind since she'd entered his world. The music began as a whisper, a series of hesitant, melancholic notes that spoke of loneliness in a gilded cage. It was the sound of her own fear, her own despair. But then the melody began to shift. A powerful, defiant undercurrent emerged, a bass line that was strong, dangerous, and fiercely protective. It was him. It was the sound of his unwavering presence, the dark, formidable shield he had placed around her. The two melodies danced around each other, a quiet war between light and shadow, vulnerability and strength. It was a song of fractured hope, of finding a terrifying sanctuary in the heart of a storm. It was their story. She closed her eyes, pouring every ounce of her confusion, her gratitude, her burgeoning, dangerous desire into the music. She sang, not with words, but with a raw emotion that flowed from her soul, a mournful, soaring sound that filled the vast emptiness of the penthouse. From his chair, Enzo listened, utterly still. The whiskey in his glass sat untouched. The music wasn't just beautiful. It was a devastating, intimate confession. He heard his own solitude in the haunting chords, the crushing weight of the empire he commanded, the legacy of violence he carried in his name. This woman with her music had looked past the phantom, past the ruthless mafia boss, and had seen the man, burdened and isolated by his own power. For the first time in his life, he felt not just seen, but understood. A crack appeared in the immaculate granite facade he had spent a lifetime constructing. When the final trembling note faded into silence, the quiet that returned was different. It was heavier, charged with a new, profound intimacy. Alara kept her head bowed, her fingers resting on the cool ivory keys. She felt stripped bare, having offered him the most vulnerable part of herself. That song, Enzo's voice was a low, rough rasp, startlingly close. She hadn't heard him move. He stood beside the piano, his shadow falling over her. It had a name. "I call it the Phantom's Lullaby," she whispered, not daring to look up. He was silent for a long moment. "Then my father," he began, his voice strained, raw. "He built this empire on fear. He saw kindness, loyalty, any flicker of softness, as a weakness to be exploited and crushed. He taught me that power was the only language the world understood." Alara finally lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. The cold, controlled mask was gone. In its place was a flicker of something deeply wounded, a profound weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. She saw the boy who had been forced to become a monster. "There was a man," Enzo continued, his gaze fixed on some distant, painful memory. "Rico. He was my father's most loyal soldier. But he questioned an order once, an order he felt was dishonorable. My father, he made an example of him. In front of everyone. I was 16. I watched him bleed out on the cold stone floor. And I did nothing." He closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his jaw. "That was the day I learned that in my world, mercy is a sin. And protection is a brutal, bloody business." He opened his eyes, and they were filled with a raw, unguarded pain that made her own heart ache in empathy. "When I saw Carbone put his hands on you," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper, "when he threatened your voice, I saw Rico. I saw a moment where I could act, where I would not stand by and do nothing again." The confession hung between them, a fragile, terrifying bridge. This was the Phantom unveiled. Not just a ruthless king, but a man haunted by his past, desperately trying to rewrite a history of violence by wielding it with a different purpose. The fear she held for him began to dissolve, replaced by a wave of profound, overwhelming empathy. The lines between danger and desire didn't just blur, they evaporated completely. He reached out, his hand coming to rest on her cheek. His touch was not possessive, not demanding, but unbelievably gentle, almost reverent. His thumb stroked her skin, a feather-like caress that sent a cascade of fire through her veins. "You," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name, "are the one thing in my world that I will protect with honor, not just with fear." She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. This was it, the point of no return. She was accepting all of him, the Phantom and the man, the darkness and the sliver of light he so fiercely guarded. He lowered his head, his lips meeting hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry claiming. It was the taste of expensive whiskey, of profound loneliness, and of a promise sealed in the shadows. It was a raw confession of his own, a surrender to a feeling he had long believed was a fatal weakness. He kissed her with all the pent-up intensity of a man starved of light, and she met him with equal fervor, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. It was a pact, sealed in the heart of the penthouse, under the watchful, glittering eyes of the city. The songbird had not only seen the Phantom, she had chosen to stay with him in the dark. The fragile truce in the penthouse, forged in shared vulnerability and sealed with a kiss, proved agonizingly brief. Alara woke the next morning with a sense of dizzying hope, a new lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in years. The memory of Enzo's raw confession, his tender yet fierce touch, burned on her lips. She had found something, perhaps salvation, in the heart of the beast. But the beast's world, a brutal ecosystem of vengeance and power, was merely lying in wait. Enzo was gone when she woke, the scent of his cologne lingering faintly in the air, a phantom promise. Marco informed her with his usual clipped efficiency that Enzo had an urgent matter to attend to, a loose end from Carbone. Alara, still basking in the afterglow of their intimacy, merely nodded, a strange, misplaced trust blooming in her chest. She spent the morning in the studio, her music flowing freely, unburdened by fear for the first time. The notes danced, vibrant and alive, a stark contrast to the mournful melodies of her past. The call came around noon, a number she didn't recognize, but the voice was soft, saccharine, and unsettlingly familiar. Alara, darling, purred Penelope Thorne, Silas's estranged sister, a woman known for her viperous charm and hidden agendas. It's Penelope. I heard about your unfortunate incident at the club. Silas can be so crude. I'm having a small, discreet luncheon, just a few influential women, really hoping to raise some funds for Lena's foundation. A new ethical foundation, of course, far from Silas's grubby hands. You simply must come. It's at a quiet little tea house in the West Village. Don't tell Silas, or Enzo for that matter. This is just for us girls, for Lena. A pang of suspicion immediately struck Alara. Penelope and Silas had a notoriously volatile relationship, marked by public feuds and whispers of betrayal. Yet the mention of a legitimate foundation for Lena and the promise of escaping Thorne's influence was a lure too potent to ignore. It felt like a chance, a sliver of genuine freedom, separate from Enzo's dangerous orbit. This was her chance to fight for Lena, on her own terms, without Enzo's brutal methods. It was a stupid, foolish hope, born of desperation and a burgeoning desire for self-reliance. I can be there, Alara said, trying to sound nonchalant, even as her heart hammered. Wonderful, darling. Noon sharp. Don't be late. The line clicked dead before Alara could ask for details. She told Marco she was going for a walk, a lie that felt bitter on her tongue. The thought of telling Enzo, of having him dissect the invitation with his cold, calculating logic, filled her with a sudden, rebellious defiance. She wanted to do something she chose, something good for Lena, without his shadow looming over it. This was her attempt to define her own freedom, even if it meant taking a foolish risk. The tea house was quaint, charming, tucked away on a quiet cobblestone street. The air inside smelled of jasmine and warm pastries, a comforting, almost innocent aroma. Penelope, impeccably dressed, greeted her with an overly effusive hug, her smile a little too wide, her eyes a little too bright. A few other women, impeccably groomed, sat around a rosewood table, sipping tea. It all felt normal, safe, until it wasn't. As Penelope poured her tea, a sudden movement caught Alara's eye. A black sedan, too sleek, too dark, slid silently to a stop outside. The tinted window lowered an inch, revealing a flash of a cold, familiar eye. Not Matteo Carbone, not Enzo, but one of Carbone's men, his face grim and utterly devoid of anything resembling warmth. Then the heavy, almost imperceptible click of the tea house door being locked from the outside. Penelope's saccharine smile twisted into a predatory sneer. Foolish girl, she hissed, her voice now hard as flint. Did you truly think I would help you? You're a pawn, Alara. Always have been. Always will be. Terror, cold and absolute, slammed into Alara. This was a trap. A devastating, elaborate trap. Lena, she gasped, her voice raw with dawning horror. Oh, don't worry about Lena, Penelope cooed, her eyes glittering with malice. She'll be fine. For a little while, anyway. This isn't about her anymore. It's about Enzo. And your foolish entanglement with him. Penelope snapped her fingers. Two hulking men, silent as ghosts, emerged from a back room, their faces grim. Matteo wants to send a message. A very painful message. And you, darling, are the messenger. Panic, raw and visceral, seized Alara. She scrambled from her seat, knocking over her teacup. The delicate porcelain shattered on the floor, a sound that echoed the shattering of her naive hopes. She darted towards the back exit, but was already blocked. Trap. Utterly, irrevocably trapped. They dragged her out, forcing her into the black sedan. The city blurred past the window, a cruel mockery of her vanished freedom. Her phone, clutched in her hand, buzzed with an incoming call. Enzo. But they ripped it from her grasp, snapping it in half. Despair, thick and suffocating, choked her. She had been so foolish. So utterly, arrogantly foolish. They drove her to an abandoned warehouse on the industrial waterfront. The air smelled of brine and decay, the kind of place where secrets went to die. Inside, Matteo Carbone waited, a triumphant smirk twisting his lips. He was flanked by his men, their faces hard and unforgiving. The songbird has strayed from her cage, Carbone purred, his eyes raking over Alara with a chilling possessiveness. And now she will sing a different tune. A lament for Enzo Rossi's fatal weakness. Just as Carbone raised his hand, a chilling scene unfolded outside the grimy, broken window. A car, one of Carbone's, was parked erratically, its engine running. Two figures struggled inside, one of Carbone's men and Marco. Alara gasped. Marco was fighting, but he was losing. Then, with a brutal, sickening crack, Marco's neck snapped. He slumped, lifeless, against the car window. And then Enzo appeared. He moved with a speed that defied logic, a dark blur of raw, unbridled fury. He pulled Carbone's man from the car, slamming him against the rusted metal with bone-jarring force. Enzo's face was a mask of cold, terrifying rage, his eyes burning with an inferno Alara had never witnessed. He didn't just fight, he annihilated. Every punch, every calculated strike, was delivered with a precision and brutality that made her stomach churn. He broke bones, twisted limbs, extracting a terrifying revenge for Marco. He was a force of nature, utterly unleashed and utterly terrifying. Carbone's men inside the warehouse, momentarily stunned, scattered. Enzo was no longer the controlled, elegant phantom. He was a dark, primal avenger, dripping with lethal intent. He dragged the broken, whimpering body of Marco's killer towards the warehouse entrance, then, with a single devastating movement, snapped his neck, tossing him aside like a broken doll. The crack echoed in the cavernous space, a chilling declaration of vengeance. Alara watched, frozen in horror. Her stomach churned. This was the true Enzo Rossi. This was the cost of his protection. The man who had gently stroked her cheek, who had listened to her music with such profound understanding, was also a ruthless, cold-blooded killer. The image of Marco's lifeless body, then the brutal, unforgiving justice meted out by Enzo, shattered the fragile trust she had begun to place in him. It wasn't just Carbone she feared anymore. It was him. You killed him, she whispered, her voice choked with a mix of terror and utter betrayal. You're a monster. Enzo froze, his head snapping towards her. The fury in his eyes slowly receded, replaced by a devastating, almost primal pain. He saw her face, contorted in fear and disgust, and for the first time he understood. He had just lost everything. The trust, the budding connection, the hope she had offered him, all shattered by the brutal, necessary violence of his world. He had tried to protect her, to shield her from the darkness, but in doing so, he had revealed the very darkness he embodied. He was pushed to his breaking point, realizing he stood to lose not just her life, but her soul, and with it, his own fragile hope for redemption. He had done what was necessary, but the price he now saw was higher than he could ever have imagined. The love that had dared to bloom in the shadows was now bleeding out, staining everything with its bitter, agonizing truth. The sickening crack of Marco's neck, the limp slump of his body against the car, echoed in the vast, decaying warehouse. Alara's whispered accusation, "You're a monster," hung in the frigid air, slicing through Enzo Rossi's rage like a jagged shard of ice. For a single, agonizing heartbeat, he froze. Her words, laced with terror and profound betrayal, were a more devastating blow than any his enemies could deliver. He had lost her, lost the fragile, incandescent hope she had awakened in him. The realization was a raw, searing wound, but the pain, crippling as it was, lasted only a fraction of a second. It transmuted instantly into something colder, harder, a glacial fury that surpassed any he had ever known. Marco, his loyal, unwavering right hand, was dead, murdered, and Alara, his Alara, was in the hands of the very man who had just orchestrated that brutal execution. The monster she saw, he would become it. For her. Matteo, Enzo's voice, when it came, was a barely audible rasp, devoid of human warmth. You just signed your own death warrant. Carbone, basking in his perceived victory, merely laughed, a hollow, mocking sound that grated on Enzo's shattered nerves. A little upset, Rossi? Your dog is dead. And your songbird. She's about to learn a new tune. He gestured, and two of his men, burly figures with cold, dead eyes, seized Alara, pulling her closer to Carbone, a perverse shield. The crude fabric of their coats smelled of stale sweat and fear, a horrifying contrast to Enzo's usual scent of clean power. Alara struggled, a choked cry tearing from her throat as they clamped down on her arms. The rough grip, the terror in Carbone's predatory gaze, it was suffocating. She looked at Enzo, her heart a tangled knot of fear, anger, and a desperate, illogical plea. His eyes, dark as midnight, met hers. She saw the pain, yes, but beneath it, a consuming, lethal resolve. He was coming for her. The monster was coming. Enzo's right hand moved, a blur of practiced precision, extracting a small, encrypted satellite phone from his inner jacket pocket. He brought it to his ear, his gaze never leaving Alara. Marco's dead, he bit out, his voice low, guttural. Carbone has Alara. Warehouse, Pier 17. Initiate full protocol. No survivors. Burn it all down. The command, delivered with chilling calm, was absolute. And get Sophia to a secure location. Now, across the city, his vast, unseen network ignited. Alarms blared in forgotten safe houses. Encrypted messages flashed across screens, and engines roared to life. This wasn't a skirmish. It was total war. Inside the warehouse, Carbone smirked. Making calls, Rossi? Too late. Your little bird is ours. And soon your empire will crumble. He pulled a glinting, pearl-handled knife from his jacket, its edge catching the faint, dusty light. He pressed it lightly against Alara's cheek, drawing a thin, crimson line, a chilling drop of blood welling on her skin. Alara gasped, the cold steel a terrifying promise of pain. Her heart throbbed, a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. She saw Enzo's eyes darken further, a terrifying, silent roar of pure, unadulterated rage. That drop of blood, her blood on her flawless skin, was the final spark. No. Enzo thundered, the word echoing through the cavernous space. He moved, not with reckless abandon, but with a brutal, calculated precision that was terrifying to behold. He was a force of nature, honed to lethal perfection. He didn't draw a gun. His hands were the weapons. He was a phantom no more, but a tangible, devastating storm. The warehouse doors burst open with a deafening crash. Not from the front, but from 3 different entry points simultaneously. A squad of Enzo's elite men, silent and efficient, poured in, moving with military-grade coordination. They were ghosts in designer suits, their suppressed firearms spitting silent death. Carbone's men, disoriented by the multiple entry points and the sheer speed of the assault, fell like dominoes, caught in a crossfire they never saw coming. The scent of cordite, sharp and metallic, filled the air, mingling with the industrial dampness. Alara, momentarily released by her captors as they scrambled for cover, instinctively ducked behind an overturned stack of crates. Her head was swimming, the chaos a blur of motion and muffled gunfire. She saw Enzo, a dark, unstoppable blur, cutting through Carbone's remaining guards with savage grace. Each strike was devastating, aimed to incapacitate, to break, never to merely wound. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, a testament to years of brutal training and a chilling spectacle of vengeance. Carbone, seeing his forces decimated, snarled, "You think this changes anything, Rossi? I still have her." He lunged for Alara, his pearl-handled knife glinting menacingly. Alara saw him coming. The terror was immense, paralyzing, but deep within her, a spark of defiance, ignited by Enzo's unwavering advance, flared to life. She was no longer just a desperate songbird. She was a survivor. As Carbone lunged, she remembered a subtle detail from her time in the warehouse, a loose floorboard near her foot. In a desperate split-second decision, she twisted, kicking out at a corroded metal drum that stood precariously close to Carbone's path. The drum clattered, sending a shower of rusted debris, momentarily obscuring Carbone's vision and throwing him off balance. It was all the opening Enzo needed. He moved with the speed of a striking viper. He tackled Carbone with bone-jarring force, slamming him against a grimy pillar. The pearl-handled knife clattered to the concrete floor, a pathetic echo against the sounds of battle. Enzo's hand closed around Carbone's throat, his fingers like steel bands, squeezing, demanding atonement. "You touched her," Enzo snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the very foundations of the warehouse. "You touched what is mine," Carbone gasped, clawing at Enzo's arm, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. His muddy eyes, once filled with arrogance, now shone with pure, unadulterated terror. He tried to speak, but only a gurgling sound escaped his constricted throat. "That girl, that package you were expecting?" Enzo continued, his voice chillingly calm amidst the chaos. "It's already been redirected. Your entire operation liquidated. Your money frozen. Your contacts exposed. Your name, it will become a whisper of shame, a cautionary tale. Your empire, Matteo, is a smoking ruin. And your life." Enzo's grip tightened, an audible snap echoing in the sudden lull of fighting as his men secured the perimeter. "It ends here." He dragged Carbone, limp and gasping, towards a rusted metal hook hanging from the ceiling, a gruesome trophy. Alara watched, a tremor running through her body. The brutality was horrifying, visceral, yet a strange, primal vindication surged through her. This man, this monster, had been brought to his knees, his evil undone. Just as Enzo lifted Carbone, a single, muffled gunshot echoed from a distant corner of the warehouse. Thorn. He had found a hidden pistol, his eyes blazing with desperate, cornered fury. He aimed, not at Enzo, but at Alara, a final venomous act of spite. "Alara!" Enzo roared, his head snapping towards the sound. Without hesitation, Enzo dropped Carbone, drawing his own hidden firearm with impossible speed. A single, precise shot. Thorn staggered, a dark bloom spreading across his chest, his eyes wide with disbelief as he collapsed, the pistol clattering uselessly to the floor. Justice, brutal and absolute, had been served. Enzo didn't spare Thorn a second glance. His eyes, now burning with fierce, possessive love, sought Alara. She stood frozen, trembling, watching the last of her tormentors fall. Her initial terror of Enzo's monstrous side still lingered, a chilling shadow, but it was being rapidly eclipsed by an overwhelming, incandescent wave of relief. He had saved her. He had come. He was beside her in an instant, his arms wrapping around her with a fierce, possessive strength that threatened to crush her. He pulled her against his hard, solid body, burying his face in her hair, breathing her in as if she were the only oxygen in his ravaged world. The scent of him, expensive leather, smoke, and something uniquely, powerfully masculine, filled her senses. "Alara," he whispered, his voice ragged with emotion, raw with relief and a love so fierce it bordered on desperation. "My Alara, are you hurt?" His hands moved over her, checking, searching for any sign of injury, his touch both gentle and utterly dominant. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, tears of terror, of relief, of a profound, bewildering gratitude. "Ah, I saw Marco," she choked out, the memory searing. His grip tightened, a silent acknowledgement of the shared grief. "He died for you. And for me. He will be avenged." He pulled back slightly, his stormy eyes searching hers. "You called me a monster," he said, the words a low rumble, devoid of accusation, simply a statement of fact. Alara met his gaze, her heart still hammering, but a newfound clarity piercing through her fear. Yes, he was a monster. But he was her monster. The monster who had moved heaven and earth, who had burned empires to the ground to save her. "You are," she whispered, her voice still trembling, but firm. "But you're my monster. And you saved me." A flicker of something dark and triumphant, yet profoundly relieved, crossed Enzo's face. He bent his head, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was raw, desperate, and utterly possessive. It tasted of salt, of fear, of vindication, and of a fierce, unyielding claim. It was a promise, made amidst the ruins of Carbone's world, that she was irrevocably, absolutely his. There was no more doubt, no more hesitation. In the heart of the inferno, Enzo Rossi had claimed his songbird, and she, battered and broken but fiercely alive, had finally, completely, surrendered to his dangerous, unwavering protection. The stench of smoke and decaying metal lingered, a bitter, metallic tang that coated Alara's tongue even hours after the rescue. Enzo had whisked her away from the ravaged warehouse, not back to the penthouse, but to a secluded, opulent safe house nestled deep within a quiet, tree-lined suburb. It was a stark contrast to the brutal reality they had just escaped, a sanctuary of soft lighting, plush carpets, and an almost unnerving silence. She sat on a luxurious sofa, wrapped in a blanket softer than any cloud, the warmth a comforting weight against her trembling body. Her arm, bruised from the struggle, throbbed with a dull ache, a constant reminder of how close she had come to utter annihilation. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the turmoil in her mind. The images replayed in an endless, horrifying loop. Marco's lifeless body, Carbone's terrified face, Thorne's final, venomous shot, and Enzo. Enzo, a whirlwind of controlled, brutal violence, executing justice with chilling, absolute finality. He sat beside her, not touching, but his presence was a palpable, possessive comfort. His usual immaculate suit was discarded, replaced by dark trousers and a simple, fitted black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. There was a faint smudge of grime on his cheek, a streak of blood, not his own, near his temple, stark reminders of the inferno he had just walked through. He looked weary, strained, but his eyes, though still intense, held a vulnerability she hadn't seen since his confession, a deep, abiding worry that was solely for her. "Are you warm enough?" he murmured, his voice rough, devoid of its usual controlled cadence. He reached out, his hand hovering over her forehead, checking for a fever. The gesture was tender, almost hesitant, a stark contradiction to the ruthlessness she had witnessed. Ilara nodded, unable to speak, her throat thick with unshed tears. She wanted to recoil from him, to scream at the monster, but another part of her, a raw primal instinct, craved his touch, his unwavering presence. He had killed. He had destroyed. But he had done it for her. To save her. "I called Lena's doctors," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "She's stable. My men are at the hospital, watching. No one will get near her." The news brought a fresh wave of tears, hot and stinging. Lena was safe. Her sister, the fragile anchor of her life, was out of harm's way. And it was all because of him, because of the brutal, bloody efficiency of his world. The man. "Marco," Ilara finally managed, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, Enzo. He died because of me." Enzo reached out then, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "He died defending what was ours," he corrected, his voice firm, possessive. "He knew the risks, and he would have done it again. He was loyal. He was family." His eyes darkened, a flicker of cold, dark satisfaction crossing his face. "Carbone's accomplices. Thorne's sister. They're all being dealt with. Swiftly, decisively. No one who touched you, who dared to threaten you, will walk away unpunished. The message will be clear. In this city, my protection is absolute. My claim is absolute." Ilara shivered, a blend of lingering fear and a strange, dark satisfaction winding through her. She saw the ruthlessness, the unyielding justice of his world, playing out in real time. It was terrifying, yet undeniably effective. She saw the consequences of daring to cross Enzo Rossi, and in a twisted way, it made her feel even safer. Her monster would ensure no one ever hurt her again. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her, drawing her into the warmth of his body. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful thrum of his heart, a rhythmic beat that promised life and unwavering protection. She felt fragile, yet undeniably safe, cocooned in his formidable embrace. "You called me a monster," Enzo said again, his voice a low rumble against her hair. "You were right. I am. My world demands it. My legacy demands it. But I am your monster, Ilara. Only yours. And I will burn cities to the ground if it means keeping you safe." She lifted her head, her eyes searching his. "The man who killed Marco," she whispered, the memory still fresh, agonizing. You killed him." Without a second thought, Enzo met her gaze, his expression solemn, unwavering. "He took Marco. He threatened you. There is no other choice. In my world, hesitation is death. Weakness is exploited. I cannot afford either. Not when it concerns you. Not when it concerns my family." He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "I know it was brutal. I know it scared you. But it was necessary. To ensure you never have to face such a threat again. To ensure Lena's future." Ilara looked at him, truly looked at him, past the blood, past the violence, to the weary, burdened man beneath. She saw the deep lines of responsibility etched around his eyes, the heavy weight of the empire he commanded. He had shown her his darkness, his capacity for merciless retribution, but he had also shown her his unwavering loyalty, his profound, possessive love. It was a terrifying, beautiful contradiction. "I don't understand your world," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm starting to understand you." A ghost of a smile, raw and tender, touched his lips. "It's a world of shadows, Alara. But with you, perhaps there can be a little light." He tightened his embrace, pulling her even closer, a desperate, possessive comfort. "I will never ask you to forgive what I am, but I will ask you to trust that I will always keep you safe. Always." Alara closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, a mix of power, danger, and now, undeniably, love. She had witnessed the darkness necessary for their survival, the brutal efficiency of his justice. It was a terrifying reality, but it was their reality. And in that moment, cradled in the strong, possessive arms of her monster, she realized she was beginning to reconcile the man with the world, the love with the violence. It was a rebirth, not just for her, but for part of him too, a fragile healing blooming in the heart of the shadow. The profound loss of Marco, the terror of the attack, had stripped away the last vestiges of her naive illusions, leaving only a fierce, unwavering acceptance of the dangerous, beautiful man who now claimed her. In a world that often demands silence, how many of us have felt like Alara, trapped by circumstances, singing a melody of quiet despair? Her journey reminds us that our past debts, our hidden scars, do not define our worth. True strength isn't just about fighting monsters. It's about daring to be vulnerable enough to accept a love that sees your cracks and still finds you beautiful. Enzo, the formidable phantom, found his redemption not in conquering cities, but in fiercely protecting the fragile heart of a singer, proving that even in the darkest shadows, love could be the most powerful, healing force. If this story resonated with a part of your soul today, if it reminded you that you are worthy of absolute protection and unwavering love, please join our community. Hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Let us know. Together, we can find light in every shadow.